I mean, so far this year, Earth has registered its hottest month on record. Maui's experienced 115 fatalities at the hands of extreme wildfire. Europe's largest wildfire engulfed Greece, and data from the 2023 Canadian wildfire season shows that the carbon emissions are more than double the entire previous cumulative annual record for the entire country. And those fires have blanketed 5 times the land compared with an average over the past 10 years. If we look inside of California, so far this year, Allstate and State Farm have pulled out of offering insurance in the state because of wildfire risk. And the UN estimates that extreme wildfires are estimated to rise 14% by 2030.
Welcome to the Curiosity Podcast, where we go deep on a wide variety of technical topics with the smartest leaders in the world. I'm Immad and Raj, the co-founder and CEO of Mercury, and I've also invested in 300 plus companies.
I'm Raj Suri. I'm the co-founder of Lyft and Presto Automation, and today we're talking about wildfires with Max Brodie, who is the co-founder and CEO of Rain. Rain is pioneering a new type of technology to stamp out wildfires almost as soon as they start, with autonomous vehicles being sent to a site and extinguishing those fires. Very interesting technology that is tackling a problem that's just getting worse and worse. And Max himself has a very interesting personal story and connection to this problem. Immad, what did you enjoy about this conversation?
Max has just gone really deep on, wildfire tech. He obviously understands his problem very deeply, but also the broader context of what's happening and other companies kind of going after this. It's just, it's nice to go deep on this topic that affects so many people. I live in San Francisco. Everyone knows that 2020 fire that turned the whole sky orange. So it's just good to see people kind of, taking these problems seriously and applying technology to try to help solve them.
Absolutely. Working on hard technologies to solve huge problems is exactly what Max is doing. And it was really interesting to hear his incredible knowledge about not just the technologies that are being used today, but also wildfire, the politics of wildfires, and also just about vegetation models. I didn't expect to be, learning about vegetation models today and how those affect wildfires, but it was really interesting to learn. So with that, let's welcome Max.
Welcome to the show, Max.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, Max. How have you been?
I've been well. It's been a bit of a trying time over the past month in the world of wildfire, certainly with Lahaina and Hawaii, but personally for myself, my hometown, which, that was 20 years ago, did not escape the Canadian wildfire season. And so 19 years, 364 days after the fire that inspired Rain, massive firestorm is still burning through Kelowna, British Columbia. 35,000 evacuations, 189 homes have been lost. So thankfully, no loss of life, but it's just one of those things where, we started the company to solve that problem. And I just wish, we were a couple years down the road and we could, bring the tech back to where it all started.
Did your actual childhood home burn down?
So in neither the original fire or in this new fire did my home burn down. Very thankfully. It's an extraordinarily traumatizing thing as a kid.
Of course.
And so I remember standing on the roof with my dad, nailing a soaker hose down, to the cedar roof, so that for the weeks that we were away, if any embers happened to fly through, that there'd be a smaller chance of it igniting our home.
Wait, so how long ago was this, the fire that was in your childhood?
Literally 19 years, 364 days before this one started on August 16th.
And you thought to yourself that day, I should try to build a company to solve this, or that came a lot later?
So ever since that time, the question was always, okay, what would it take to stop this fire when it was a single tree? Because that was the story, right? That's what we heard. This fire began with a lightning strike on a single tree. It was reported at 4 a.m., but nobody was able to get to it until after the sun rose and the winds picked up. And by then it was too late. Within a few days, the army was called in. As a 12-year-old, 13-year-old or whatever it was, it's like, well, why couldn't we get to it when it was a single tree? What would that take? Just like the questions of kids, right? And the answer turns out to be that it's possible, but it's hard, especially because winds drive fires to grow very, very fast. And so it's always been at the back of my mind, building startups, since then. And after selling my last startup, we got into a space of, okay, what's going to be the next thing? And being now in California, experiencing year after year of extreme and catastrophic fires, it's like, well, I've seen this story play out. This is not just a one-time thing. I saw this 20 years ago. What can we do?
Maybe step back a little bit. I mean, where do you think the state of wildfire tech is today? It seems like very clear the wildfires are getting worse. Is any tech doing anything to stop wildfires today? Or is it all still the old-fashioned, firefighters and helicopters?
Well, there's a fantastic amount of activity and energy going into the emerging space of wildfire technology. We've been building Rain since 2019, and so we've kind of grown up with this new emerging area of technology. And what's really encouraging is that we are starting to see fire agencies and fire professionals lean more into technology, because ultimately that's what it's going to take in order to get stuff deployed. And we've seen folks at local fire agencies, state fire agencies, and even now federal fire agencies starting to recognize that this is an inevitable future. We are going to have rapid wildfire containment systems in the future, and are asking questions about how does this integrate into standard procedures? What are the standard operating procedures? How does this integrate with dispatch? How does this integrate with what we do today? And so those are the types of conversations that we're having now, and it's very encouraging. And there's a ton of federal momentum as well. Both the White House and Congress released policy guidance this year in 2023 that is encouraging or requiring fire agencies to develop plans to integrate autonomous aerial suppression into their operations. And so the White House report came out in February, and that was mirrored most recently in the FAA reauthorization bill that's currently before the Senate.
Are firefighters using anything new, or is there anything being used new today, or is it all kind of old-fashioned? Is there any other technology you look at and say, oh, that's been adopted, so my technology also has a path to adoption? Because sometimes that's the way it works, right? You see one technology kind of find the happy path, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the wildfire technology that's been most broadly adopted to date is in the early detection and simulation areas. So early wildfire detection, there's already over 1,100 early fire watch cameras in the state of California, with even more across the American West. These are cameras that are doing algorithmic smoke processing, sometimes using machine learning to identify the approximate coordinates of ignitions, and that gets relayed to dispatchers, which then assign resources to go investigate those ignitions. And so this happens today. And it's incredibly exciting because, of course, we're working to equip those dispatchers with the capability to then very, very rapidly respond to ignitions before they grow out of control with autonomy. So early wildfire detection is a vanguard. There's companies that have been building in this space for several years. Pano AI is one of them. Recently now raised an extension to their Series A, adding $17 million to an already, multi-$10 million financing round this year in this economy. The early wildfire detection, a few years ago was, well, is this going to be real? Is it not? Are we going to be able to detect fires fast? Well, that question is largely resolved now, and that, yes, we are going to be able to detect fires when they're small. And so the next question is, what are we going to do about it?
Can you use satellites to detect it, or is cameras the only way to do it?
So there are several different ways of doing early detection. So the governor in July announced a memorandum of understanding to fund, in collaboration with the Environmental Defense Fund, a constellation of early wildfire detection satellites. So that is on the horizon. It's a big effort within the community to get global coverage of sub-minute early fire detection from low Earth orbit. And then on the ground, in addition to cameras, smoke detection sensors, which are essentially literally just smoke detectors for the forest, are currently being trialed by CAL FIRE in their test forest. So lightning detection is an old technology, been around since the 1970s, and now we have the software that can better predict which lightning strikes are going to turn into ignitions. So a massive amount of effort being put into early detection.
What are the steps from the lightning strikes all the way to, I guess, rain swooping in and solving the problem? And what are those pieces that you think are built, and what are pieces that you still have to kind of deploy?
Yeah. So the end-to-end picture looks like this. The early detection sensor, whether that's a camera, whether that's lightning detection, whether that in the future is a satellite-based detection or an IoT smoke sensor that's distributed throughout a forest, says, okay, we think there's something around here, and that's about the resolution that we're going to get from an early detection sensor. It could be, we think there's something in this 1 square kilometer, or we think that there's something in this half a square kilometer, and that information gets transmitted to the dispatcher, and then the dispatcher will be able to approve a response from a nearby rain-equipped helicopter. And that aircraft will then, within 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes, be at the site of the general ignition coordinates and use its onboard infrared thermal sensors to localize exactly where the fire is in order to develop a plan to suppress it. And so that plan looks like, okay, should I be putting down fire suppressant ahead of the right advancing flank and then use, say, the remaining 40% to put out hotspots that are popping up ahead of that fire front? Or should I use my entire payload to put down a right and left flank because I know that 3 minutes behind me, there's another 1,000 gallons of suppressant that can come and put out the hotspots that are starting to grow. And so it's this fascinating real-time optimization problem to make best use of the available resources.
Is this helicopter connected to the humans via the internet? And is the human making this decision, or are you actually trying to put enough intelligence in the helicopter to detect the situation and make its own kind of autonomous decision?
Yes. So it is a autonomous aircraft. Large payload, which is required for the types of ignitions that tend to get away. The types of ignitions that tend to get away are ignitions that are driven by 30, 40, 50 mile per hour winds, which grow extremely fast, which require thousands of gallons of suppressant in the first couple of minutes. And so we are building enough intelligence onto the aircraft to be able to make the decisions around, okay, where should the fire suppressant go, and in what order. And ultimately, this is because that enables scale. When you're remotely piloting a single aircraft, if you just take the pilot out of the aircraft and put them on the ground, now they can manage, say, one aircraft responding to a single ignition. But adding that autonomy enables them to shift into a supervisory mode, where now that single operator on the ground can oversee 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 aircraft in the future.
And for now, it's an autonomous helicopter, right? That's the kind of mode of autonomy. It looks like, and you were saying earlier that you initially started with a quadcopter, and that's the picture behind you. So tell us how you ended up with a helicopter kind of mode, and do you see it changing over time? Is helicopter just the thing that you're using right now, or do you think that's the long-term kind of mode of dispensing with this?
Yes. So we knew even when we started with the small drone back in 2019 that suppressing ignitions in high wind conditions was going to require substantial payload. And we used the smaller platforms to develop the initial technology in order to move towards these larger platforms. Whether it's a small aircraft carrying 20 pounds of fire suppressant, or whether it's 1,000-pound aircraft carrying 300 to 400 pounds worth of fire suppressant, the technical challenges are similar and can transition to larger platforms. And so the trajectory has been, we did early detection and rapid response with a 55-pound drone. Then in 2022, we moved onto a 1,000-pound max takeoff weight small helicopter, which is what you see on our website today. And then we began in 2022 as well to integrate our software with much larger autonomous aircraft, like what you see on our website as well. And we've moved to these larger platforms in order to bring the rapid suppression capability to high and extreme wind-driven ignitions, which the reality is the vast majority of ignitions that get away are driven by these high winds. Now, in the future, I'm very confident we will support a variety of aircraft types that are coming down the pipeline. We're very excited about everything that's happening in the eVTOL market. But the reality is that the energy density of batteries is insufficient to carry the massive amounts of payload that's required to contain an ignition that's being driven by those 30, 40, 50 mile per hour winds. But that will improve, and we'll be ready to integrate at that time.
And where are you on this technology? Like what is it lab scale, pilot scale, production scale? Where exactly is it?
Mm-hmm. So we've demonstrated the technology in Half Moon Bay, which is our testing facility, in 2022. And then we're looking forward to demonstrating the technology with fire agency partners coming up in 2024. It should be an exciting year. When we look at the technology stack, we are focused on adapting existing civil and military autonomous aircraft with the intelligence to perceive, understand, and suppress fire. So we take existing matured aircraft autonomy systems and then add the intelligence to make them useful for rapidly responding to these ignitions. And so when we look at the history of autonomous aircraft, they've benefited from decades of investment by the Department of Defense to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars to mature those platforms. And now we are building that application layer that's specific to making these autonomous aircraft useful for rapidly identifying and suppressing wildfire ignitions. So more to come, but it should be an exciting year ahead.
I just want to learn more about this Half Moon Bay test you did. So what was the test? How was it structured? What was the success criteria, and what did you do, and what was still left to do?
So the Half Moon Bay test was taking our Mosquito aircraft, which was running an aircraft autonomy system that we integrated with, and dispatching that aircraft to a suspected ignition, where once it approached the ignition, then proceeded to suppress that ignition with its onboard compressed air foam system. And so the tests have largely remained the same since 2019, but doing so with larger aircraft. And so in 2019, the test was early detection, rapid response with a 55-pound drone. In 2022, the test was early detection and rapid response with a 1,000-pound max takeoff weight helicopter. And then coming up will be that same format, early detection, rapid response. And then the roadmap ahead looks like expanding the conditions in which we demonstrate these tests, different vegetation types instead of grasses, moving on to brush, timber, and then doing so in ever increasing winds and more difficult environmental conditions. And so that's where we go from here.
When do you expect to be deployed in a space?
So deployment is really it's in partnership with fire professionals and fire agencies. And so the technology is not so much the restricting factor as it is the answering the operational questions around integration. How do these aircraft behave in coordination with other aircraft? Who has the authority to dispatch? And so those are the types of questions that we're working through. In integration into existing fire agency procedures can move at the speed that the fire agencies are comfortable with deploying these systems. And so that could be late 2024 or it could be 2025. We're looking forward to working with the fire agencies to answer these questions as soon as possible so that we can get the systems into the world.
So there isn't like a technical limitation right now. It's just a case of kind of proving it out more and deploying it when I guess the agencies are ready.
Yes, and so of course there's expanding capabilities on every single one of the domains. Like there's expanding capabilities in perception and suppression, but there is nothing that immediately prevents us from beginning a training and familiarization program, with fire agencies to help them become comfortable with the technology and understand the technology in order to develop those standard operating procedures. That's really the next step, and that's the thing that actually helps get the technology into the world ASAP. In parallel to working through that familiarization program, the competencies will continue to evolve and get better, and that's what we do in partnership with our customers rather than in isolation.
How many of these kind of helicopter platforms would you need to cover an area, let's say like Northern California?
That's a fantastic question, and we begin by answering that question based on the physics of fire growth. So we look at the factors that drive how quickly fires spread, factors like the topography, the dead fuel moisture, the expected wind speeds, the vegetation type, and then model out, okay, if a fire were to start in any one of these locations, how quickly would an aircraft need to respond? And then working backwards from that answers the question, okay, where should those aircraft be pre-positioned or stationed in order to get there fast enough? So if we take an aircraft like the Black Hawk, which carries 1,000 gallons of suppressant, the coverage to, say, protect Northern California is on the order of dozens of these aircraft. And the technology can support dynamically pre-positioning these aircraft in the future, and so that means that if the wildfire risk is low, you don't need a bunch of aircraft hanging out in the corner of the state in that area. But on the order of dozens to 50 aircraft would be pre-positioned or forward deployed.
Got it. And do you expect to own the aircraft yourself? Is Rain going to own 50 of these Black Hawks, or is the idea that these fire departments will own them?
So we do not intend to own the aircraft. We are providing technology that enables these aircraft to be pre-positioned and remotely commanded to respond to ignitions before they grow out of control. So we are happy to bring in partners to operate the aircraft if fire agencies want to be totally hands-off and just contract for this service. But our engagement with the customer is a software subscription on a per aircraft basis.
Got it. I just did a quick search. I'm sure you have better data, but apparently a Black Hawk costs between 15 and 40 million. And so 50 of these would not be that expensive, right? Have you kind of thought about the ROI for kind of these fire agencies to do this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, California spends, billions of dollars every single year on direct suppression costs, which is really a drop in the bucket compared to the total costs and losses attributable to wildfire, which across the entire United States is $348 billion annualized, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. So the ROI for getting to fires quickly and stopping when they're small is very, very obvious. Multi-100x ROI. And it gets even better when the new Blackhawks are not required to be deployed. The Department of Defense has fielded thousands of these aircraft and very often transfers these aircraft to fire agencies so that agencies actually have to acquire them directly from the manufacturer. So that autonomy can be completely retrofitted to these aircraft as well.
They're already being used by fire departments just without this kind of autonomous layer?
Absolutely. California's fire agency, CAL FIRE, has deployed 12 Blackhawk or Firehawk helicopters, which is the name they get when they are upgraded with a tank, and has 4 more on order. And it's a very, very popular platform with fire agencies across the entire country, in part because the Department of Defense has so many of them and frequently makes their excess aircraft available to other forms of government, and then also sells off their excess aircraft to contractors.
And these Blackhawks have like full autonomy already baked in. You guys aren't innovating on the autonomy of like these helicopters, right?
Correct. We do not take care of the platform level problems like auto takeoff, auto land, identifying emergency landing zones, sensing and avoiding other aircraft. It doesn't really matter whether you're carrying cargo, doing a medevac mission, carrying people, or suppressing wildfires. Those platform level competencies need to be handled regardless. And so we leave that to the baseline platform that we build on top of. Not all Blackhawks come with this autonomy built in. Far from it. This is a very advanced upgrade package that has mostly been coming out of the Department of Defense and has been tested and funded by the Department of Defense over the past decade.
So in some ways, like, this technology is already kind of exists. Like someone's working on detection. We have these autonomous helicopters that are already owned by the fire departments, and you're kind of stringing it all together and want to have this network of these deployed and have all the kind of intelligence for like detecting the fire and like solving the actual fire issues.
Absolutely. There's a lot of surface area in this problem space, and we are very focused on enabling these autonomous aircraft to be useful for responding to and rapidly suppressing fires, and then bring in the other partners to go and ultimately deploy the end-to-end solution.
What do you think the timeline is on this technology being widespread? Like, when do you think like this type of this vision becomes a reality? What timescale are we thinking about?
Yeah, so our ambitious objective is to protect the extreme and high fire threat areas in the state of California by 2030. That is obviously an aggressive timeline, but it's urgency befitting the situation. So fundamentally, this technology can move at the speed that fire agencies and government are willing to adapt and take advantage of new technology. And so it's a significant emphasis of our team is helping bring about that future faster by doing everything we can to educate left, right, up, down the government about the capabilities that this technology can bring to help solve the wildfire crisis.
Do you think the main bottleneck is just like the political will, or like having government buy technology, or is it the technology itself?
So I'd say the primary barrier is educating the government on the capabilities of the technology and integrating the technology into how things are done today. Standing up a training and familiarization program is a key objective for RAIN to help make that very visceral. I can show you videos of autonomous helicopters completing complex missions that is technology that's been funded through DARPA and the Department of Defense. That's, and not to be cliche, but the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed yet. It's not broadly recognized. And so to help accelerate the adoption of this technology, we need to get the technology in the hands of fire agencies and fire professionals so that they can start to use it and start to trust it. And when we're talking about this kind of technology, obviously, that's something that we need to partner with fire agencies to do. We can't just go out there and do it by ourselves, or nor would we want to. We need to work with them to bring the technology into the fold.
So Max, it seems crazy to me that that governments aren't just like rushing towards adopting this and trying everything they can to like accelerate the rate at which we can fight these fires, and just given the fact that the fires themselves seem to be getting worse and worse every year, and so I find it hard to believe that 2030 is like when the first time we can kind of start seeing these at scale. Do you think it's a matter of like working with certain governments or certain places that are maybe faster to move? Maybe some smaller governments. Like I was just talking to somebody, he lives in Whitehorse in the Yukon. Whitehorse had a big fire too. He said the Yukon actually is very nimble government because they're smaller and they can actually adopt things much faster. And I was just wondering, like getting that first case study with this technology is going to be so important, right? And probably the state of California, my guess, is not going to be the fastest to move. It's probably the biggest state in the U.S. So I'm just thinking as an entrepreneur now, like trying to find the lowest friction path to getting that first customer. So I'm sure you've thought about this. So what sort of techniques are you thinking about?
Yeah, it's well taken point. Finding the early adopters is actually how we filter everything we do. And so whenever we work with a fire agency, large or small, the first question we ask is this person that we're speaking to on the other side, are they an early adopter? Are they a visionary? Can they see the future? Because as a startup, we have very limited time and resources, and we have to work with the people who also see the future. Of course, we're engaging with the large fire agencies. We have to, certainly because their timescales are prolonged. But the first fire agencies that we have been working with more closely are the county level fire agencies, the counties are often where innovation happens first, precisely for the reasons that you described, Raj. They're more nimble. They have less stakeholders in decision making, and so in the year ahead, you can look to see projects with county governments and RAIN, which we're very excited about.
Are fires actually getting worse? Like that's like our anecdotal feeling living in California. Like it seems like there's more smoke and more often. What is the actual stats?
So far this year, Earth has registered its hottest month on record. Maui's experienced 115 fatalities at the hands of extreme wildfire. Europe's largest wildfire engulfed Greece, and data from the 2023 Canadian wildfire season shows that the carbon emissions are more than double the entire previous cumulative annual record for the entire country. And those fires have blanketed 5 times the land compared with an average over the past 10 years. If we look inside of California, so far this year, Allstate and State Farm have pulled out of offering insurance in the state because of wildfire risk. And the UN estimates that extreme wildfires are estimated to rise 14% by 2030. So the anecdotes find companion in the data. So we are dealing with an unprecedented increase in frequency and severity of extreme wildfire.
What other technology is there? There's obviously, we talked about detection. Obviously, you're working on like quick response and suppression. Is there other kind of categories of technologies that are going to help with these fires?
Oh, absolutely. So it's an entire ecosystem of technologies that are growing up over the past couple of years. And in addition to early detection, which there is a ton of work being done in early detection that we've already discussed, technologies to support scaling prescribed fire is another key area. And so essentially, not all fire is bad. We need good fire in the ecosystem. Fire is natural, and part of the challenge that's contributing to these extreme wildfires is the fact that when we move into the wildland area and suddenly our homes are at risk, it becomes much more difficult to put good fire on the ground. And so we haven't been putting a lot of good fire on the ground.
So what makes a fire good?
Low intensity and principally low intensity and managed. And so, for centuries, Native Americans have been burning the land in order to thin the forests, essentially decrease the density of vegetation. And this means that when fires happen unintentionally, instead of having a massive amount of fuel and understory, essentially all of the branches that fall off and create a massive fuel bed for fires to burn at higher intensity, instead, the ground is dirt instead of fuel. The distance between trees is greater, and so fires spread at lower intensity and are easier to manage. And so we need to get back to a posture of introducing a good fire in the landscape, but that's very challenging when there's communities and homes in the wildland-urban interface. So some technologies to support this. One of them is a company called BurnBot. They are essentially building an upside-down incinerator on wheels. Also, you can think of it like a lawnmower for prescribed fires. It is a robot that goes around just like a lawnmower, back and forth over grasses and light brush, and all the burning happens inside of the chamber. So as it moves across the landscape, the vegetation is burned. And then the smoke is filtered on the way out, and no fire escapes the chamber. And so that's one tool that's being applied towards introducing more good fire in the landscape.
Any other technologies? Detection, suppression, good fires, anything else?
So a huge amount of work has been done in simulation, better understanding and predicting where fires are going to start, how fast they're going to grow, to inform decisions like, where should fire trucks be staged or pre-positioned today? And then, of course, insurers are asking the same questions about, what homes should we be willing to offer insurance to or not? And utilities are also looking at the same simulations, trying to figure out, okay, where is our assets most at risk of fire, and also where are our assets most likely to cause an unintended fire. And so the simulation work has been fantastic over the past 3 to 4 years. If we look at this through the insurance angle, essentially what happened was wildfire was not considered a primary peril before 2018. So a primary peril is something like an earthquake, a flood, a hurricane. Wildfire was considered a secondary peril prior to 2018. And that's something like, what's the probability of your water tank, going, or what's the probability of, a car driving into, the front of your house off the street. And all of those models were upended after the 2018 Camp Fire. And over the past few years, the industry has been applying the very latest artificial intelligence and machine learning tech to better understand how fires are going to spread, where they're going to spread. And that's been applied across the entire industry now, not just in insurance. Although I suppose that the insurers didn't really like what they saw with the better models when they decided to pull out of the state this year, at least Allstate and State Farm.
Yeah, heard about that. So is there anywhere, is this a global problem? I've seen the fires in Greece, which areas seem to be most affected? Obviously, the west coast of North America has been affected greatly. But also, it sounds like East Coast this year was also affected greatly. Again, probably due to like very wooded areas in Canada, it sounds like. But which other areas around the world are most susceptible to this?
Yeah. Well, I'll start at the high level, which is that according to data from the United Nations on the impact of carbon emissions attributable to wildfire will cost the global economy $3.6 trillion by 2050. And if we look at global carbon emissions today, 18% of the global fossil fuel CO2 emissions were generated by wildfire, with data coming out of the EU's Copernicus Atmospheric Monitoring Project. So the thing about wildfire is that it transcends boundaries. There's the smoke from Canada is impacting eastern United States, has traveled over to Europe when the 2020 fires in Australia, which were absolutely catastrophic. The smoke from that traveled the entire world over several times, and so the long tail impacts of wildfire, it doesn't really matter where the fires start. It's a global issue, both in carbon emissions and air quality. If we look at regions that are particularly prone to wildfire outside of the United States, certainly Canada, Australia, the Mediterranean, South America, parts of South America, Chile, are all hotspots for extreme fire activity. But really, when I look at this, it's less about where the so-called problem areas are today, but what areas are going to be impacted tomorrow. A lot of people this year have told me that I never expected Canada to be at high risk of wildfire. Isn't it cold in Canada? Well, yes and no, right? Like these places are extremely cold, but also extremely hot in the summer, and there's a lot of forest and fuels to burn. So, just one crazy thing about Canada, some of these fires are expected to not go out. They enter into the understory and into areas where there's peat on the ground, and are anticipated to just burn indefinitely.
Wow.
These are. We're in a time here where extreme fires are popping up in places that people don't anticipate, and that the long tail consequences of these fires are not fully recognized.
It's almost like a positive feedback loop for climate change. Like basically, the hotter it gets, the more fires you have, the more carbon dioxide you emitted, and then the hotter it gets. Is that the right way to understand this?
Yes. Wildfire is a climate flywheel. It is both impacted by climate change and a cause of climate change. We're undergoing a broad rewriting of our relationship with forests at the moment, which were previously considered to be a carbon sink, a reliable carbon sink. You'd buy carbon credits to plant forests in order to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. But there's just like staggering data that shows that, especially looking at the situation in Canada, that this is no longer the case. And I can send you a graph afterwards that just kind of puts that into perspective.
And then once an area is like burned, like a bunch of California has had fires recently, is there some respite for that particular area? Like it's been burned, so it won't be burned for another 20, 30 years or something again, or it won't go on fire again?
It really depends on the vegetation model. So for things like timber, that can be the case. Certainly in my hometown, it's been about 20 years since a fire came through. In many places, however, vegetation like chaparral, which is this fast-growing bush that's tightly interwoven and interconnected. That stuff, if you burn it down, it's going to be back to where it was within a couple of years, and just as much of a threat for transmitting fire across that particular landscape. So the short answer is it depends.
Is it that we're like kind of technologists and we think, hey, technology can solve this problem? Or like, do you genuinely think that like with, smart use of technology, this could be at least maybe not solved, but like a managed problem for humanity?
Yeah. I'd say as a technologist, technology is a tool, and I think it's an extraordinarily powerful tool. But ultimately, it's people that solve problems, and we need to do the work to help the people become comfortable with the technology. If I would not say that the rain technology in isolation is going to solve the entire problem. No, but rain technology in concert with other technology and in concert with forest management practices that we know are sound, like putting good fire on the landscape, I think that could end up solving the problem.
Maybe a little bit of a tangent, but as a Californian, you always hear PG&E blamed for every fire. At least that's my impression. I'm like, goddamn PG&E, no one more fire. And they also got blamed because they cause blackouts in order to avoid fires. Like, how much of it is PG&E's fault, or is it just climate change and PG&E is like an easy scapegoat?
I'd say that broadly as a society, we're not very well prepared for the impacts of climate change. Wildfire is the vanguard. It's the first visible, massive, scaled impact of a warming climate, but it won't be the last. And so there's a bunch of difficult questions that need to be asked around, who is responsible for climate adaptation? Who's responsible for paying for climate adaptation? I know a lot of folks at PG&E, and they are doing their very, very best, to deal with a difficult situation. Which, sure, there's stuff they could do better, or they could have done better over the past several decades relating to maintenance. But there's also a lot that it's a very, very difficult thing to be responsible for all of climate change and global warming within your service territory. And so, as usual, the answer to this question is more complex than the media typically likes to paint. And there's a lot of hurt on all sides. But I think that it would do well for all of us to require of our government to ask and solve the difficult questions about how are we going to adapt and live with the changing climate, and who's going to pay for it.
That's just the way it works, right? Like, humans wait for the consequence of something to happen before they start doing something about it. And of course, we'll do something wrong for the first few times, and then we'll start to adapt. Do you see other analogies in major natural changes that we've faced as a species and having to adapt to that? I'm just trying to think of what are the other major analogies like this that there might be. It's kind of hard to think of it right now because it's or maybe it's a very unique thing. It's like a first big change that we're seeing that we actually have the technology to go and combat.
It's a fascinating question. I'd say the scale is likely unprecedented, but throughout recent history, if we look at the last 100 years, as a global community, as a species, we have demonstrated an ability to adapt our environment to solve difficult problems. Like we are located in Alameda, California. Substantial portions of this island were created. They were created out of the bay. And if we look back into the 1950s and 60s, people back then, scientists back then, were contemplating technologies that could, at a global scale, reduce the luminosity of the sun to help prevent global warming, at least as they saw it, but also to help manage the climate to better support growing crops. And so I think on the technology versus other problems spectrum, I think we're very, very capable of adapting and applying technology to these problems. The much harder thing is, how does the entire world agree on technology that by putting nanoparticles into the upper atmosphere to adjust the weather. Who gets to control that, or should we do that? Should we just let nature be nature? To what extent do we take an active role in managing the climate with these technologies? Like, those are, in my opinion, the more difficult things.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, you bring up those good examples, and I was thinking about it too. I mean, I think industrializing countries have had to deal with the consequences of their own actions in these feedback loops, where they're like, okay, they're creating water pollution or air pollution, and the water pollution like poisons people, and the air pollution causes acid rain or something like that, and causes smog and things that are not desirable. And they've had to change how cars emit particulate. Or in China, they actually ban cars. Like, you can only drive your car on every other day in China. So people do make this kind of very stark adaptations to their behavior to adapt. But it probably takes, there's like a time cycle, right? So once the consequence is real, it probably takes on the order of a couple decades to fully adapt to that. So it's probably what we're seeing right now with wildfires, is that the consequence, as you said, since 2018, so it's only 5 years, and now the global community is going to have to adapt to it in a big way. Technology is going to be a solution, and behavior change is going to be a solution, and political will is going to have to be there too. So it's like a combination of things. It's kind of exciting to see how we react. Is there any other application of when you think of the advancement of AI and robotics? Do you foresee any other changes which are not being used today but could happen in the next decade that would make a dent in these types of climate problems? You mentioned the luminosity of the sun. I mean, things like that, kind of more out there ideas.
At the end of the day, at least within our field, it's all about response time and getting to ignitions as fast as possible. We have technology to build extraordinarily fast ways of transporting mass from point A to point B. Rockets, missile technology, and so instead of helicopters or aircraft, if you equipped something resembling a rocket with a payload of fire suppressant, and you combine that with extremely early detection that was then had extremely fast confirmation, that payload could be delivered very, very fast. Now, that would require the entire public getting comfortable with the idea of essentially domestic projectiles that are being fielded in order to stop an ignition when it's 10 feet, instead of letting it grow to maybe an acre by the time the autonomous helicopter gets there. But these are things that are, again, not outside the realm of technical possibility. It's more an issue of what the public and the government is going to deem as acceptable or comfortable. So we joke that that's something that if we fast forward 50 years, that could be the eventual end for a technology like rain, is extraordinarily early detection and hypersonic rapid response. But if we look at the tools that we have, the tools that we have are so incredible, and so much of my everyday life is trying to bring these incredible tools that are so broadly deployed in other spaces, and help build trust and confidence in these tools within communities that don't assume them or take them for granted the way that technologists do.
Yeah, the domestic missile sounds very interesting. I almost wonder if it's almost like part of it is a sales job to the public, getting the public aligned behind some of these things. The public sometimes has irrational fears of things like nuclear technology and things like that, right? So this could be the same, but it could also be sold very well. I mean, there's also a clear pro case to do this. So do you think a little bit about that, like marketing to the public to get public buy-in?
Yeah. From the very earliest days, we have been super convicted that taking this technology on a roadshow and building the grassroots, public support for the technology is an expeditious path to deploying the technology in the real world. Essentially, running a campaign of sorts, executing a political campaign to a similar degree of expertise, that a candidate might do, because it is a public issue, and the way that public issues get brought to the forefront in this country is always door to door, going on the trail, and so we look forward to making the technology more visible to the public. But of course, we are a startup, and to do that, we cannot incur the costs alone. We have to bring along and bring in signal from the customers to do this.
Yeah.
So,
How many helicopters would it take, or helicopter platforms would it take to cover Maui? Like Maui is quite a small place, right? Like, would it be like 2?
So we haven't run the modeling yet for Maui, but it's on our to-do list. And when we do run the modeling, I expect it would be more than 2, and I expect that it would be less than 20 to be able to reliably end the threat of catastrophic wildfire on the island.
California is hard, but Maui seems like very achievable. And obviously, I'm guessing like the people of Maui / Hawaii are like pretty motivated right now because of what Maui is in people's minds. It's like a very it's kind of like a iconic place, so that would be really strong marketing wise.
And it's a smaller government too.
Immad, my next investor update is going to go out in the next 48 hours or so, and one of the asks is introductions to innovators within the government in Hawaii. So we're there. It's just need to find the right people in order to introduce it.
This is a great chat, Max. Really appreciate you taking the time, your inspiration in the work you're doing. And I think the audience will love to hear about this and kind of the technology going out there to fight fires. So thanks.
Yeah,
for
everyone should be cheering for your success. It's going to help everyone out.
Thanks, Immad. Thanks, Raj. It's been fantastic to share just a little bit about what we've been building and the road ahead for Rain. It should be an exciting next year as we start to bring the early detection rapid response technology more visibly into the world.
So Immad, that was really interesting. And I guess you've known him for a while. And I wasn't aware this technology was actually like even being tested right now.
Yeah, I actually met him at a VC event, and I like had this really long chat, kind of similar to the chat we just had. I was like, wow, this is sick. And I'm a big believer in technology solving these like kind of humanitarian problems. And it felt like, obviously he has a ton to do to actually get it live in 2030. Sadly, feels like far away. But it's just so cool to see someone working on it.
Yeah, these are the problems that technologists, when they work on it, they feel very gratified because they're solving just a massive problem for humanity. And so you can tell he's very motivated because of his personal story. And so, the passion is going to be there, the drive is going to be there, and he has the background to make it happen. It sounds like the biggest challenge is going to be just selling to government. We would cringe just going through that process, but he has the long-term vision and the passion to maybe break through these barriers.
Yeah, one thing that makes it a little easier is that, especially in America, I find it sometimes annoying, but the government is so decentralized, right? Like you have cities, you have counties, you have states, then you have... So yeah, there's enough pieces of early adopters that he can build it up. But yeah, he is selling to a government, and that's always going to be much slower than kind of going to businesses or consumers.
The technology itself, it seems doable, but it also seems hard, right? Like you're sending these autonomous vehicles to a site within just like 5 minutes. Like it's like the best fire truck ever, and then you have to detect it. I guess the detection happens through these cameras. Is that right?
Yeah, so they're detecting just the area, right? He said 1 kilometer squared. So when this helicopter gets there, they do have to do the detection and then come up with a response in real time, I guess, on site. I think without the autonomous technology that's built into these Black Hawks, without that, there would be just no way a startup could do it. With that, at least, like they're kind of outsourcing the initial detection and the autonomy of the aircraft. So, the problem is still complicated, but it's not like a unsolvable problem, right? It's just an engineering challenge.
Yeah, and they're not actually investing in these helicopters either, right? So that helps. It's not a capital heavy model. They're focused on the software.
One thing that's interesting about these very big climate change problems is that there's such a tragedy of the commons in place, right? Like if it was just a localized area where you got fires and you just had to deal with that fire, like the incentives would be just so high because like there's so much money at play. But you have these like massive areas where they have like consequences across states and across countries. It's very hard to just get organized enough to go like, oh, we have $10 billion worth of problem, let's spend $1 billion to solve it.
Again, I really do look at this in terms of early adopters and late adopters. Like the early adopters will be the most motivated. They'll prove it out, and then they'll have a case study for the mainstream and the late adopters. I've seen this in other areas where we have like traditional customers, it always works like that. And eventually it'll become a standard. The same as the way the actual fire trucks are the standard today. I'm sure that wasn't the case back, 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago. And then one day it became the standard, right?
Fire hydrants were probably like some major technology advance at the time.
So yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. Getting really deep into the wildfire side, and I learned a lot about just how wildfire is affecting the world. So yeah, really enjoyed that one.
Same here.